Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here today and share with you a little bit about my senior project. My senior project is entitled Civil Society and International Environmental Law. And essentially, my senior project was a large research paper where I got to look at a lot of academic understanding of what is the role of civil society or non-state actors in the international decision-making process. But it was also a space for me to bring my own experience into the academic context, reflect on it, and hopefully contribute something as well. So my ultimate paper looked at the values and concerns of civil society in the international process, as well as what youth specifically as a case study brought into the process. And I want to explain with you a little bit about my own history and involvement as context for this. So I've been involved with this great US youth NGO called Sustain Us for the past 4 years. And the mission of Sustain Us is to empower US youth at the international level. And the idea is that as young people, with this being our future and these being really important decisions about the environment, sustainability, and social issues, that we should have a voice in the process in some level. So I've actually helped coordinate their Agents of Change program, which brings youth to these delegations for the past 3 years. So I got really involved in this and have been to the Commission on Sustainable Development at UN headquarters, Commission on Social Development, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's actually through the climate change talks that I've been probably most involved with youth. For the past 3 years, I've been to the negotiations and working with the whole international youth movement that's really been trying to figure out how to have a voice on these issues and coordinate together to have official what's called constituency status, which is how stakeholders are recognized in the negotiating process as having a voice and being able to make formal statements. So it's been a process I've been really involved in, part of the context that I wanted to look at in this paper and compare with the research and understanding there. And finally, another kind of element to all this is next year I have been awarded the Watson Fellowship, so I will actually be continuing to look at youth empowerment and environmental decision making, and I'm really excited to continue this work that kind of started at COA and was Sustain Us looking at this and continue it into a broader context. So first I want to explain a little bit about what the context of civil society and international law is. Usually, negotiations are between state actors. So you have governments that have the decision-making power that are negotiating on these issues. And that makes sense, right? Governments are representative of their people in theory, and they are the ones who are making decisions. But what's really going on is you have states interacting and making decisions, but then you have these kind of outside actors called civil society, non-governmental actors, who are trying to influence the process in some way, who have opinions about what's going on, and who want to have a voice in the process. So what I looked at in this context was what is the value of having these outside actors in the process? If governments have decision-making power, is there really value in having these outside actors? And so I want to share with you just a couple key highlights in relation to what are the values, and then also explain a little bit about this youth case study that I wrote up. And in the context of values, one thing that really frames this discussion for me is the concept of discursive democracy. And so I'll start by explaining it through this picture. This is my friend Dominic at the negotiations in 2007 in Bali. And he's talking with the negotiator there, and the issue they were talking about, it was a small contact group on education on adaptation. And basically in the text they said, let's put some stuff up online, we'll have some resources, and we'll call that educating people. And as young people doing a lot with peer-to-peer education and being part of education systems from around the world, we said, wait, there's a lot of other ways we can be educating people. Shouldn't we be encouraging governments to think about this in a bunch of different ways? So through putting together our own points on what we thought was important ways to educate people on adaptation and talking to negotiators, we actually saw some of our final points reflected in that text. And so for me, that's one clear example how having outside actors with different knowledge and thinking about things in a different way actually enhance the possibility of solutions in that final product. So in the concept of discursive democracy, the idea is that not that everyone has a vote in the system, but that everyone has a voice, and that by actually having more diverse voices and everyone having a voice at the table, we can enhance the possibility of solutions. So you have different stakeholders like farmers, indigenous people, women, youth, environmental NGOs, all coming together from really different backgrounds and understandings. And the idea is that that actually adds something to the process that's really different than if it was just governments in their own box. So by bringing these outside perspectives, it kind of pushes what are the possibility of solutions and adds to the discussion. Another aspect that I highlighted as one of the important values that I wanted to share with you all today is how civil society help connects what's, in my mind, kind of this far-off negotiating box of a world. Like, most people don't follow international negotiations. It's hard to know what's going on there. Why is it relevant? Why is it important? And civil society helps play a role in connecting that to what's going on locally and why it's relevant. So this is an example, again, at the 2007 negotiations in Bali. And this is a group of Canadian youth, and their sign says, "This will follow you home." And during the final hours of the negotiations, basically, the Canadian government was stalling process in a number of ways on certain issues. And as young people who were really concerned about there being an outcome from that negotiation, they were outside with banners, and all of a sudden you saw media portraying this back in the Canadian newspaper. So this actually was an image in some of the Canadian newspapers. So that's one way that civil society can really tangibly help connect what's going on and break it down into an understandable message that helps inform public opinion about what's going on internationally. And another image that I wanted to share was this one. The sign simply says, "We are watching you," and I think that is a very blunt but honest sense of what civil society adds. It adds this outside transparency that instead of it just being a negotiating box simply between governments that's really technical and hard to understand, there's informed civil society helping to bridge that gap to local levels and helping to understand how it's relevant to different policies and contexts. And finally, the youth case study that I looked at, this shirt really sums it up well for me, what the value of youth is. So again, with the case study, I kind of looked at what is my own experience over the past 3 years and the experience of youth in the climate negotiations, and how does that relate to overarching values and concerns about civil society. So in relation to youth, the value I really highlighted was how youth help remind the negotiating session and bring context to the fact that it's not just about the decisions made in the here now, but there's a real impact for future generations, and this idea of intergenerational equity, that what the decisions we make now need to be fair and equitable for the future generations as well. And so on one side of the t-shirt here you say, how old will you be in 2050? And youth this past year leading up to the climate negotiations in Copenhagen, when they started each statement to the plenary, they said, "Hi, my name is Lauren Nutter, and I will be 61 in the year 2050. And the idea was that it was a really we got away with it kind of as a snarky but blunt way of saying, we're going to be the ones around in 2050 when these impacts of climate change are hitting the hardest. And 2050 is a year that the International Panel on Climate Change has identified as a key kind of baseline for comparing what will the impacts be in the future. So it was a clear way of us kind of saying, you really need to think about the future. And on the back of the shirt, it said, "Don't bracket our future." In a negotiating world, you bracket text when you're unsure about it or you can't agree on it. And the concept here is, don't bracket our future. You need to ensure that there's a sustainable and healthy future out there. So I added that as a case study kind of to the context and hopefully some of the research out there about what really can be the value of civil society in these negotiations. And from having personally spoken with some US negotiators and other negotiators, there does seem to really be a sense that by having young people there in brightly colored t-shirts and saying these things, that it does add some sense of accountability and a reminder about future impacts. So that was my key highlights, and I just want to thank my academic advisor and family and those who have supported me through all of this, and I will take questions at this point.
Any questions? Ron, any questions? Ron? How is civil society different than what we think of as lobbyists?
So Ron's question was, how is civil society different than what we think of as lobbyists? I think there's some overlap in the sense that essentially the point of a lobbyist is to put your ideas out there. I think in the US especially, there's a really negative connotation to lobbyists because we associate it with big oil companies and those that have a lot of money. But at the same time, any one of us in this room in theory could be a lobbyist and hopefully are active and engaged citizens. Whether you consider that a lobbyist or an active engaged citizen, I think there's a fine line. I think here in the US and in this context, we associate a lot of that with the money behind it and some of the negative aspects. I think in this context, civil society is really, I think it's a little bit closed in the sense that there is some sense that there's inequality between those who can actually be there. And as young people, actually, we've been trying to get better representation from around the globe. And that's one of the initiatives that youth have helped with, bridging funding between the global north and the global south. And I think things like that are really important to share that it's not just one type of perspective, but that it really is a diversity, because that's part of, I think, the richness of what civil society can contribute. Over there? Sure, yes. Sure, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you'll be doing on your
Sure. So Lynn asked me a little bit about what I will be doing on my Watson Fellowship. My plan right now for countries is to go to Turkey, I was going to go to Mexico, but it's now on the warning list, so probably Argentina instead, India, the Maldives, and the Netherlands. And what I'm looking at is youth empowerment and looking at it on different levels and different contexts, so locally, nationally, internationally. For example, in the Netherlands, they have youth councils as part of their government system, so youth are actually integrated into the government decision-making process, and I find that really intriguing as a model and would like to learn more about. Is that effective? How do young people in the Netherlands feel about it? Is it real or is it kind of tokenism? And hopefully exploring things like that.
Great. Thank you, Laura.